All right. Good to see everybody again. Huge turnout today. I'm excited. Yeah, we're talking about Autonomics again today. We went over yesterday why it's important. It's important because it's our main fuel delivery system to our tissues. Every time we put our hands on somebody, deliver an adjustment, whatever, that afferentation monosynaptically excites the IML at that level. We went over a bunch of that stuff yesterday. Where does it live? It starts in the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus regulates autonomics. Talked a little bit about that yesterday. Sets our circadian rhythms. Our appetite centers are there. It helps us with our water balance and thirst. It's highly tied to the limbic system, so it's our center for emotional responses and behavior. So it's kind of like the autonomic concomitants of your emotions, because it's also linked to your insular cortex. So it's like when you feel anxious or something like that, your stomach may have butterflies or it may get queasy or something like that. That's all your hypothalamus and your insular cortex working there. I also talked a little bit about how the hypothalamus and the mesencephalon are homologously linked, and how the hypothalamus is kind of like a pacemaker. It's always firing, and so that means the mesencephalon is always firing as well. Which means that we need a way to gate both of those, because if we always have a firing mesencephalon, that goes up into your brain to excite all sorts of stuff, especially your limbic system. So that's one of the main functions of the basal ganglia, is to gate that system to make sure that we're not freaking out all the time. So we talked about a bunch of that stuff yesterday. And today I was thinking we're just going to get into some of the testing. So we know that cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10 are our parasympathetic centers in the brainstem. So I figured we'd just go ahead and start with Westfall nucleus. So if we want to check the Westfall nucleus, we talked a little bit about that before. You just get your pen light out or your ophthalmoscope, and you use the consensual light reflex. So you shine it to the eye, and then you have your eye on the other pupil to see what happens. See how fast the pupil constricts. See how long it holds. It should hold to 1 to 3 seconds, and then it should start to fatigue, which when you see it kind of fluttering like that, it's called hippus. So after 3 seconds, it should fatigue a little bit. But we're looking for things like TND, which means that it'll quickly constrict because it's really close to threshold, and then right away it's just going to fatigue out. And what was that?
You just want to, before you activate it, you want to just check it before passively, so you expect on the side of higher sympathetic tone to have a larger pupil at resting too.
Yeah. And I was going to talk about that in a second. So yeah, you look at that. You also look and see, okay, does the pupil constrict, and does it hold and hold and hold? And if it does that, it means that there's a supraplastic mesencephalon there. It means that Westfall nucleus has built all sorts of connections to hold that constriction, which is typically a sign of either a primary mesencephalon problem itself, or it could be indicative of a basal ganglia that's starting to break down. And a good way to differentiate between the two is if you see that plastic pupil, you have them close their eyes and you see some spasms of the eyelid called blepharospasms. That's usually indicative of a soft basal ganglionic issue that's beginning to come out. So that's just one thing to look at there. Also, when we're in that area looking at the eyes, you're going to want to take out your ophthalmoscope and you want to check your VA ratios. VA ratios, I'm sure you haven't heard much about this. That's the ratios of the size of the veins and the arteries in your eye. So your ophthalmic artery comes right off your internal carotid, which is what delivers blood to your brain. So a good way to see how blood's being delivered to your brain on either side is to go ahead and take a look into that eye, and you want a 1-to-1 ratio. So you want the arteries and veins to be about the same size. So if you see a 3-to-1 ratio, that means the veins are 3 times bigger than the arteries. That means those arteries on that side are going to be constricted, which possibly means that you might not be getting as much blood and oxygen to the brain as you need. So one of the main problems with people with migraines and stuff like that is just not having that fuel delivery system and oxygen to the brain. And that also plays into cranial nerve 7, which we'll just go right into, with your superior salvatory nucleus. Mainly, its control is for snot and tears. So it parasympathetics to your lacrimal glands and your nasal mucosa. But also, it's heavily tied to the vasodilation in your brain when you have a noxious stimuli. So TND of this nucleus has been linked with migraines, because we know with TND, whatever nucleus we're talking about, it's going to be close to threshold, and then it's going to fatigue really quickly. And then it's going to come to threshold again really fast and then fatigue really quickly. And that sounds kind of like if you're doing that in the head with the blood supply, and you get that throbbing pulse kind of thing going, it sounds like a migraine, right? So that's one of the things that can happen. Let's see here. We have cranial nerve 9. You can see it goes to the autoganglion, to your carotids, which helps you swallow, and also that's part of your baroreceptor system. So it detects pressure in your aortic arch and your carotid sinus, and that just tells you if there's an increased pressure in the system, it's going to want to drop that blood pressure to even everything out. So the afferent into that is through cranial nerve 9 into the NTS, and then the efferent to drop everything back down is through your vagus nerve. And another way to look at vagus nerve function is to look at palatal weakness. And when you're looking at hemisphericity, you're going to see everything lining up on the same side. You're going to see decreased brain, which is going to lead to an escape of the IML, so you might have a bigger pupil on that side. You might have some higher blood pressure on that side, and then you might have a fatiguing palate on that side. If all those findings are going to come together, and you see this guy walking in like this, that might well mean that you have a hemisphericity, and you can treat that, and then check these things after your treatment to see if anything gets a little bit better. So that's basically all the talk I had. I just wanted to go through some of these tests. So, well, I guess okay. When you're looking at anisocoria, do you know what anisocoria is? It's like okay, when you're looking at pupils, when one pupil is larger than the other, they call it an anisocoria, and there's all different reasons for this. But functionally, a lot of times we see a really slight anisocoria, and that is usually physiologically maintained by either a higher firing sympathetic system or a lower firing parasympathetic system. So how do you determine which pupil is actually the big one? And the way to do that is through autonomic stress tests. Best way to do it is to use the goggles. So if you see a large pupil, and then you think that this is the large pupil, and then you're in the light, and then you strap them in some goggles and you put them in the dark, and then the anisocoria gets worse. What do you think that means? Which pupil is going to be worse? If it was big on the left, it was big on the left to start with, and then it gets worse when you put them in the dark. Yeah, it's the left, but which one do you think is the big problem pupil? Would it be, are you looking at a chormeiosis or a chorectasia? Chormeiosis meaning a smaller pupil, coarctation meaning an actual bigger pupil. Yeah, you're looking at a chormiosis when you're going from light to dark and it gets worse. You're looking at a chormiosis. Now, if you have him in the dark and you see that he has sequoia and you put him in the light and it gets worse, you're looking at a coarctation. Okay, another way, I mean, we talked about the other tests. Another autonomic stress test to see the, basically how the NTS is doing and to check and see how your cranial nerve 9 and 10 are working is called the, it's the Carotid Sinus stress test. So do you want to come up here real quick? So what you're doing with this is you're putting pressure on the carotid sinus, which basically means, it tells your brain that, okay, my system's got increased pressure now, I need to drop that blood pressure. Well, first of all, you want to check the blood pressures bilaterally, supine, sitting, and standing, just to see if there's any dysautonomia there. But this is just another thing you can do. So you put pressure on the carotid sinus, and then you're looking for a response within 10 seconds to see if that blood pressure is dropped. If it drops, then you know that that reflex is intact. And for a normal reflex, it should habituate within 30 seconds and then go back to normal. So if you have a TNDing NTS or one of these systems, you're going to see a really rapid drop of blood pressure, and then you're going to see it come back really fast. So does everybody want to try? Oh, you do? Just find the carotid. It's not the most, I don't know. For older people, they're not going to be too stoked on this test, so you better ask them if they're atherosclerotic, if they got any problems. But this is just one way to look at how the NTS is working. So you find the carotids, put some firm pressure in there. You got to make sure that they're okay too, because they might pass out on you if they're not too good. Now feel the pressure dropping. And you hold it on there. You okay? Alright, now it's starting to normalize a little bit. So her reflex is intact, and that seems okay. Do you guys want to try this real quick? I mean, that's basically, I forgot my doc bag, so I was going to have it.